We want to go ahead and talk a little bit about the War of 1812 and some of the key events surrounding that war and some of the key causes and results of that war. The War of 1812, sometimes referred to as the Second War for American Independence, is a war between Great Britain and the United States. The reason why the war was fought, there was a certain group of congressmen in Washington, D.C., that advocated strongly for this war. They were known as the War Hawks, and they included powerful congressmen such as John C. Calhoun, who was Speaker of the House, Henry Clay, um, Grundy, another significant congressman who was really arguing for war with Great Britain. And the reason they wanted to go to war, there were several reasons, but one was uh, there was a conflict in Europe, and the British were in need of sailors, and some of the sailors that they were taking to fight their war with France were U.S. sailors. The process is known as impressment, where you take a person and make them serve, in this case, in the British Navy. Uh, Sailors from ships other than British ships were very commonly the victims of this practice. The British were kind of infamous for it. And when they began taking U.S. sailors, we took exception. Here, our citizens were being kidnapped, and this is really one of the chief causes, one of the chief reasons why we wanted to go to war with Great Britain. Another reason was how the Native Americans, the Indians, were were being used by the British. The British were continuing to go ahead and cause problems for the United States in the Northwest Territories, and in fact, continued to maintain somewhat of a presence in this relatively uninhabited land. And we really wanted to start to push them out. And in places like Indiana, the guy who was the governor of Indiana for the United States was William Henry Harrison, a future president of the United States. And in 1811, uh, his forces came under attack by the Shawnee tribe led by Tecumseh. Actually, the battle was occurred at a place called Tippecanoe. And actually, Tecumseh, who was the chief of the Shawnee, was actually not president. The leader of that attack was actually Tecumseh's brother. But Harrison was victorious. And this is another thing that really leads us, okay, into the War of 1812. The folks who are arguing in Washington are like, look, we have to stand up for ourselves. Uh, we can't allow our citizens to be kidnapped on the high seas. And the Native Americans who are attacking us directly in Indiana were being supplied by Great Britain. The guns that were used to attack us were from the British. And so we view this as, look, this is actually a direct assault on our sovereignty. So the Battle of Tippecanoe certainly leads us into making a decision to go to war with Great Britain. So by 1812, the war is declared. And there are lots of different events that take place. A lot of them center around the Great Lakes, in particular around Lake Erie. We had a naval force commanded by Admiral Perry on Lake Erie, and the British also had a naval force, and we were trying to go ahead and secure the Great Lakes for use of our Navy. If we secured it, then we could go ahead and invade Canada. And in fact, that was another motivation. There were a lot of people in the United States who viewed Canada as really part of the United States, that we would wanted to go ahead and eventually expand into Canada and take over that as well. And so some of the folks who were arguing, some of the war hawks, this was their eventual goal. They wanted to go ahead and attack Canada. In order to do that, you had to control the Great Lakes. For the United States, this guy, Admiral Perry, he goes ahead and helps to try to accomplish that. And early on in the war in 1813, he does go ahead and defeat the British. And because of that, we're able to go ahead and retake Detroit. We're able to actually carry out some battles up in Canada. The Battle of the Thames River, which actually takes place in Canada, is actually where Tecumseh is killed, and that really ends the alliance with the Indians. The Indian alliance basically dissolves after the death of Tecumseh. The Battle of York, the Battle of Port George are both battles that take place up in what today we would call Ontario. So these are all examples of the U.S. going out and attacking the British. And early on in the war, we have that ability. But as the war wears on, it becomes more and more apparent that really the British are asserting themselves. They are the major world power, they are the superpower, and we are the new kid on the block. Nowhere is that better evidence than by the Chesapeake campaign. The Chesapeake campaign, the British actually sail up the Chesapeake Bay, and in doing so, they attack American installations all along the Chesapeake, including our capital. They burn Washington, D.C., they burn the White House as a result of the Chesapeake campaign. The British also go ahead and attempt to take New Orleans. This was hugely important because from New Orleans they could control the entire Mississippi River. None of our goods could get out via the Mississippi if they were able to control New Orleans. They're not successful in that. They're eventually rebuffed, actually at the end of the war by Andrew Jackson, the Battle of New Orleans, where the Americans win. And so the British were never able to really successfully control the Mississippi. But nonetheless, they did attack, and they were trying to go ahead and control, especially in the southern portion of the United States, places like New Orleans. The war finally ends with the Treaty of Ghent. It's signed in December of 1814. The Battle of New Orleans actually takes place in January of 1815. Signed in 1814, and the truly remarkable thing about the treaty is that it really did nothing. None of the issues, impressment, none of the issues around where our border was, where the British were allowed to be, none of those issues are really resolved by the treaty itself. Really, the only thing the treaty does is an armistice. It's a ceasefire. We agree that we really don't want to fight the British, and the British, to tell you the truth, really don't want to fight us, so we stop fighting. However, that's not the end of the story. Really, there are some results of the war that are long-lasting. For instance, it's really the War of 1812 that for the first time starts Americans thinking of themselves as Americans, as citizens of the United States. Prior to this, people would really consider themselves citizens of the different states, not really citizens of the country. It also goes ahead and is the beginning of a lasting peace with Great Britain. After the War of 1812, we will never go ahead and take up arms against Great Britain again, at least until this day. And so it's really the beginning of a lasting peace and a lasting friendship with the British and the United States. Also, we go ahead, one of the things that becomes a foundation of that is the agreements that we sign afterwards, a trade agreement opening up trade with Great Britain, establishing our northern border along the 49th parallel, where it still is today, one of the longest lasting peaceful borders in the world. And all of those are really an indirect result of the War of 1812. The other thing the War of 1812 does is once we go ahead and secure our northern border and we secure our relationship with Great Britain, we secure our possessions in the Northwest Territories, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, those places, we can turn our attention south. And the first place we would turn our attention to is Florida. And we'll begin to expand our country further to the south and eventually further to the west as a result of the Treaty of Ghent and the War of 1812.